taking
Like
advantage of an
like
opportunity.
the seat of your pants is the
Oh,
way
I
it
thought it was like pants are like pulling somebody's pants down, like you pantsed them.
could be. Yeah, the derived of yeah the phrasing like by the seat of your pants.
Okay.
Uh, so pantsers are the opposite of plotters. I tend to pants things for about 20,000 words, and it's funny. I was talking to Shane about this. He's like, "Yeah," he's like, I top out at like 20,000." I'm like, "Yeah, I do too." Like I pants for 20,000, and then I have to sit and like think about it. I have to put it back in the stew pot or the percolator and let it cook a little while, and then I
Mhm.
can go and I'll write the next 20,000 words. But
Right.
I only plot when I don't have time to write, and I'm like, I have a torture. I have some sort of narrative or plot idea in my head that literally won't let me like think. Like it becomes oppressive. You're like, I can't think about anything else because this story in my head. So I have to go like write out some plot notes and stuff to get it out of my head. If I don't
Right.
have time. Yeah, I wrote a lot of just kind of like paragraphs. I call them like starts or components because a lot of times I'll just have an image or a thought or sometimes it's words. A lot of times it'll literally be like a sentence, and I'll be like, I need to write this sentence, and it'll usually turn into like a paragraph of something. Sometimes it's about a character, sometimes it's a setting, sometimes it's a story, whatever.
Right.
And so I'll write those things down, and I have a whole collection of them. And a lot of times I'll find either other components that tie in with them, or they'll just percolate long enough, and I'll be like, oh, that's what that needs to be now, and I'll go, write more on it, turn it into a short story or whatever it needs to be.
Hmm.
But but, I've also gotten better at you're talking about like writing kind of whenever it flowed or whenever it came to you. And the muse is lovely. And honestly, I think that I write my best stuff when I feel like I'm really flowing.
Uh-huh.
But sometimes you write really good stuff, even though it feels like you're pulling teeth.
Hmm. But yeah, there certainly is. I mean, there's a yes. I'm in agreement with you. Sorry. I I noticed it for myself. At least in the past, I've quit early or whatnot because I'll feel like it's such a strain just to get out a sentence. Um, Sort of the approach I've had for the last couple of paragraphs that I've written has been to just type it out. I don't always adhere to this rule. Like I'll go back and be like, I don't like the way that sentence looks, and then like I'll try to edit it in the moment. But what I'm trying to do is just type it out, and even if it doesn't flow right or doesn't sound great, just get out the general concept and then go back and tweak it.
Yeah. Well, I do that because I've gotten better at just the whole typing thing because I do have a tendency to try to edit as I go.
Uh-huh.
And I still do to a certain degree, but I've gotten better at not judging it as I go. And
Hmm.
that's the trick. Uh, and the other thing is I don't edit immediately after I write it. If I write something new, because a lot of times I'll write a new chapter or something, and I'll be like, and it's like pulling teeth, and I'm eking it out, and I'm like, just keep going, and I'll finally get something out, and I'll be like, this is terrible. It didn't flow. I don't like it. It's not going to be good. I'm going to hate it tomorrow. And then usually what I'll do is I'll read it the next day or whenever I come back to it, and I'll be like, oh, this is not as bad as I thought it was.
Hmm.
But if I judge it in the moment, like when I'm doing it, especially if I'm not in the flow, like it's yeah, I would if I was inclined to deleting things, I would.
Right.
But I've learned that in general I'm better than I think I am. I mean, this may not work for everybody, but for me personally, that's the way it works. Is like I'm usually more pleased with my work than I expect myself to be.
Yeah, that's actually a concept that ties into what I was talking about earlier, just in general with the sort of framework shit I was talking about, where it's like I have an idea of how I exist, and it's like I need to try to trust that ability of mine to figure shit out, even though it's not all cleanly laid out like in a vision. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah. What was it? Rather than keeping it all to myself, I have a inclination to share my paragraph just because I was like, oh, but it's not finished. It's not going to sound right. I'm like, but yeah, that's when you share it. That way people can be like, hey, specifically, this is where it sucks. Or generally, because the whole thing sucks, you know. So I was writing this earlier. I said, oh, wow. I really see. Now I'm looking back and I'm like, oh, this doesn't even work as a sentence. Jesus. Oh, no, it kind of does. Okay. Walking out to the edge of the platform, Mala looked longingly at the bottom of the field. The charred black ruins of Calweth were off a ways. Between her and there was an open field of snow. I could just jump, she thought. A fall, then quiet. No, she thought. There's still too much to do. She let the haunting breeze linger on her skin for a while, then she went back inside. Mala walked towards the central chamber. The entrance to it was at least twice as tall as she was, but wasn't much wider. It was made of some metal. What kind, she didn't know. She stopped by a small table near the chamber entrance and picked up a withered skull from the shrine that was atop it. She brought the skull to her lips and kissed it gently. "Good morning, Father," she whispered, and set the skull back in its place. "Time to work," she muttered, then entered the chamber. So that's it. That's all I got.
Interesting. So I got a question for you. How much have you studied point of view?
POV?
Yeah.
Studied. That is a strong word.
How much? Okay, let me rephrase this. How much do you think about your intentions with point of view when you're writing?
Think about and intentions. I don't know. I mean, that's the best answer I can give. I don't know.
Okay. Well, I'm just curious because like that sounded like kind of omniscient third person to me.
Really?
And I was just curious what your intention was.
Yeah.
And
I guess, yeah, I haven't really thought about that. I felt like,
yeah, and
well, I
just
mean,
on the
I guess I just sort of correlated that with narrator style. I mean, maybe omniscient third person is sort of what I've correlated that with in my mind, but
right. Well, it's an interesting. I was just thinking about it. It's to me, it's honestly, if there's one area that I think that a lot of writers don't look into enough and don't understand the nuances of, I would say it's point of view. And it's an incredibly powerful, to me, I think it's an incredibly powerful thing to have an understanding of. You know what I mean? Beyond the basic, like first, second, third person, there's the differences in how things come across and what you can do as far as manipulating sentence structure and flow and things in different points of view is to me anyway. I think about that a lot when I'm constructing this.
okay, I think I have a better idea what you're talking about. Like if like the character that I just sort of created on the spot, Mala, if it was like more true first person, like it wouldn't be like Mala did this or did that or whatever. It'd be like I speaking from the first person, right?
Right. Well, no, that's proper first person, and I'll be straight with you. First person is, it appears to be easy, but it's actually extremely hard to do well. I don't recommend first person when you're, getting comfortable with other things, because it's kind of a beast in and of itself. I really like it, but I do get myself into corners with it, and when it's done badly, it's really bad. But
Mhm.
And third person is very useful, but one of the things I use a lot is what I call close third person. And so you can play around with some of the more loose flows of words that you could in first person, but it gives you a little more. You're not as constrained as first person.
Can you give an example?
So like an example would be what made me think of was what you were writing. And you're like, Mala or whatever, he's like, you were stating that she was thinking a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that's extremely removed from that character.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But if you're a little, you can zoom in the camera a little bit, and instead of saying the person was thinking things, you can literally write sentences of the thought. And if you put it in the flow right, it doesn't seem off, and it seems almost like that character's narrating it. But you also don't have you don't have the distancing effect of that removed kind of detached voice telling you that they're thinking a thing, that sort of thing, right? Mm-hmm. And depending on what your intention is, you might want it one way or the other. But it really can change how the reader is kind of in flowing with that character, like how they're with that character or not.
Right. I'm gonna.
You talk about like the emotional content and the character and stuff. I thought might be something you might want to be interested in kind of exploring.
Okay, so one of the terms you used was close third person.
Yeah, I think I don't remember if that's the technical term or not.
I'll use it as placeholder.
Yeah.
So I wrote down omniscient third person. Close third person, that's like removing words like, they thought or something like that. It's like,
yeah. I mean, yeah. That's probably what I use the most.
Yeah, it's funny because it's like, I can already see where it would be a change trying to adapt to that, at least for my mind, because I think omniscient third person is the one that most immediately comes to mind for how to write.
Right. Well, it's a little more cut and dried.
Uh-huh.
It's more obvious what the rules are with omniscient third person. It's like I said, I don't think it. I like the kind of intimacy of the close third person, while still giving you the flexibility that if you need to, for plot sake or for sense making sake, you can throw in some extra information in there, and you can switch characters and things. You can still throw stuff in there that maybe the character isn't quite aware of. You can kind of float that, or a lot of times what I'll do is, because I think a lot visually when I'm doing setting a scene or something, and so one of the tricks that I like to use is what I think of in my head is kind of like a zoom in with the camera at the beginning of a setting. So you'll start with the camera out and you'll get like description of setting or more omniscient view if you need it, right? At kind of the beginning of the thing.
Yeah.
But then you start zooming in on the character, and then as soon as you're at the character, now you're in that close third person. But you can kind of move the camera back and forth a little if you want.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to understand.
Unintentional point of view can get really messy, because I've seen that so many times with people. It's like they'll float back and forth without realizing it, and it gets kind of sloppy, and you're like, ah.
Yeah, I don't know how I'd do close third person, because I'm wondering how I could keep the ideas intact, or at least convey the idea while changing the wording. So it's like, Mala looked longingly at the bottom of the field. It's like, how would I convey that without omniscience? Would I even try to convey that? Is that something I'd have to scrap in favor of? Like, I guess in close third person, is it as important to say like what somebody's feeling or whatnot, or is it more supposed to be implicit?
Well, I mean, in general, you always want to try to demonstrate what they're feeling more than tell what they're feeling.
Okay.
That's a good rule. I was looking to see if I could find what I think is a good example of close third person here. And also one of the good old like rules of it. Like I don't believe in rules, but I think that there are some that it's that are useful to learn from. The checking for adverbs and cutting adverbs mercilessly, or trying to figure out if there was something you could have shown instead of using that adverb is a pretty good thing to think about.
Right.
And another thing that you can do with kind of the quickness or that distancing is you can use it to affect kind of pacing.
Uh-huh.
You can use that intimacy or not to kind of convey a sense of urgency or not, or speed or not, if you want to, which is a powerful tool.
Yeah, this is this is a lot of new shit. Even though, I mean, you're not saying a shit ton, but you're conveying like, I mean, basically, if writing is like how I get out ideas, you're like, you could approach ideas in a different way, and I'm like, fuck.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been studying it a while.
Right.
But I mean, with actual, I mean, the thing about it is you're more or less, you're not just conveying ideas. You've got to FE those ideas, even though they're in words on paper. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You got to. It's not just the words you're saying. It's how you're saying them. And there's a lot of ways to do it, but I think if you're really pursuing it as an art, I think it's important to look at those things.
Yeah. There's not much difference with the other paragraph I'd written. Is like probably still third person omniscient. Just because I wasn't tracking that.
Yeah.
I just kind of had fun sort of like vaguely painting pictures with words. Like, what was it for the second one? Second one's a bit shorter. Let's see here. He was white-gray like a blood corpse. His brow was sabled, with sickly starlight for eyes. He rose up and began walking towards us, still chewing at the hand. The men drew swords. He stopped a few meters from us. Chieftain was about to speak when suddenly the thing threw the hand violently to the side, paused for a moment, and then bowed in a formal manner. He remained bowed. Chieftain spoke. "Who are you?" The other maintained pose but raised his head to meet our gaze. He presented his jagged maw as a grin and muttered, "Legion." His expression, despite the gore, was like that of a child who just told of a mischievous deed. That's all I had for that one.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, just the feeling of what was going on there was it felt like I was a long ways from whatever was happening.
Right. See, now I got to figure out how to close that distance, or at least how it'll make sense to me, like how it'll flow from me.
Right.
Because in a way, it almost feels like learning a different language. It's like not only. I mean, I don't know. I'm conceptualizing in my head that like I'll need to like think in that language of a different POV.
Yeah, let's. I'm trying to come up with a good example here, or what I think is a good example. I was looking for like an action scene because I think that demonstrates it the best. All right, so Let's try this. So there's this character, and anyway, yeah, well, you should just be able to kind of pick it up. So anyway, she headed towards the big house. There were three entrances. One was facing the barns, one was facing the bunkhouse, and the other one led to the garage on the side nearest the entry road. She had no good way to pick. If they were smart, they'd be watching all three. She looked at them. So there's yeah. So I started with a bit of a setting, kind of what was going on, but it's also what the character's seeing. And then if you'll notice when we got to this point, if they were smart, they'd be watching all three. That's a judgment call that character's making. But
Damn, I totally get what that is now, but I needed an example. It's like I was like, what is that? Like, what? How does it? Yes.
Right. So we transitioned right there. She had no good way to pick, so we're still talking about the character, and then we kind of move into her head. If they were smart, they'd be watching all three. She looked at the black smoke that obscured the hangar. It was thick and blowing towards the house. That was her only way to get close. She exited out again. There's that decision in her head. She exited the far side of the bunkhouse. The smoke was getting thicker and the wind was picking back up. She grinned. A whirlwind was moving in. It looked like it was on the right path. All it had to do was grab the smoke and hit the house. For the first time in her life, she thanked the Lord for the wind and prayed for it to blow like the Dickens, and for that dust devil to keep moving straight. She switched her revolver and waited. The devil did it. When it hit, the smoke and the dirt cut the visibility. Cass ran inside the maelstrom. She had to run to stay inside of it, and it didn't quite hit the house, but it got her close enough. 12 targets, 1 hostage, no time to waste. Cass moved. She turned the knob and kicked in the door, careful not to kick so hard that it came back on her. The door was open, and there were 3 targets. Close. 1, 2. Through the door, and the room was clear. Shots were good. Moving on. Another room. 3, 4. Only 2 left in the gun. Switch. Safety off. 8 ready. Another door. Empty. Moving. Movement. Target. Clear. Pairs are nice. Moving on. Next room. Noisy. Target's moving. They know. We'll be ready. Open door. Keep low. Keep moving. Hit. Miss. Hit. Out. Ditch the 1911. 44 back out. 2 bullets. 1 target. Target small. Obscured. Can't miss. Don't miss. 1 shot is good and he's down, but not done. Last bullet. He's dead. Didn't hit Ann. Good. Put last bullet in. Check the room. Check the house. All clear. And then it slows back down. But but I mean that may or may not be a good example. But if you know, I kept getting short. Like more or less. I mean, you got, because that whole scene, had I described what was going on in each room and each whatever, it would have been too slow. Right. But you got the character going in to clear this house, and basically I zoomed as far into that character's head as possible, because what is it? I basically went to say, what is that character actually seeing and thinking about? Right. All that character's thinking is they're counting their shots and they're acquiring and evaluating targets, right? And anyway, and then it slows back down, and they start kind of checking and seeing what's on, because things slow down. They're like, okay, I think it's all taken care of, and they start kind of checking on things and coming back to kind of real time. But I mean, that's something that I use a lot, is zooming that camera in and out. A lot of times it's just kind of what I think of as kind of an over the shoulder view. So you're definitely in the room with the character. You're right. You're real close to them. But then sometimes you'll hear, more or less, I think it is like you're sitting right next to them, and sometimes you can hear their thoughts. Right. You're not really, you aren't the character. Like, there's a difference between that and like first person, but you're usually just like sitting right next to them, and sometimes they have a thought so loud that you just thought so loud, and but
yeah, that's the sound of me taking notes, by the way.
That's fine.
Yeah. And what's funny is, as you were saying that, it's like I'm relating that in my head. It's like close third person is like it's the Western. Like it's the Western format. It's the Western POV.
Could be.
It's like sun was hot, too hot. Finally made it into town. Looking each way. Ain't no place to drink. It's like something got like just that sort of dialogue. It's like
It really kind of is. Yeah. I mean,
it's the gunslinger dialogue.
yeah. I mean, that's one. Well, the very first story I wrote was a gunslinger story, but yeah, I use that.
That's cool though.
And like detective novels, a lot of your like noirish detective stuff, you get that same feel, even when it's in third person. Like who is it? The guy that did the Justified was based off of. He does first person, but you get that really short kind of snappy stuff, and I really enjoy things like that. I've read some stuff that's crazy. That's like really focused in, like super in their head, like first person, which is kind of cool. But that's hard to write. I can write it in certain moods. Like I've started a story on that where you're really just in that person's head, and they're just making these thoughts and things, and you're just moving really fast. But it's a hard that really close is hard to write.
Yeah.
But I find it to me like one of my goals always when I'm writing is, I mean, flow is, and to the prose is something that I consider very important, and trying to draw the reader in and get them to where you're not basically sinking them down into where they can't tell the difference between the narrator and what's going on. Like I usually don't want them to realize it's being narrated.
Okay, I gotta write that down because that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, so that's something I really strive for. So like, I mean, like I was reading from Thriller here, but and one of the things that I don't do that some thrillers do is, like, you look at like Tom Clancy and some of them, like they get very technical and they'll have these long passages of describing the technical theory behind this or whatever. And
yeah. So sorry, it's just in my head, like it's popping up. It's like the technicality goes as far as the character. So it's like you might have an object, but you get a totally different reaction out of a different character. It's like one character might be holding a gun. It's like the gray one makes a lot of noise, and then a different character holding a gun like knows exactly the model and like how it goes together and everything. But it's like you can always trust that when you switch back to this other character, that they're going to give you very simplistic explanations of everything, which then you could add another layer, because with that character that makes shorter references to things, they could all of a sudden like be very, very drawn out in an explanation of something, or I mean like have a more prolonged thought about something, and in that moment you realize, oh, they care about that, but it's implicit.
Yeah, see, that's that showing emotion.
God damn it. I love it, but I hate it in a way when there's something that's so obvious, but I didn't know it was obvious because I've never heard of it before.
Yeah, well, that's something that I've written some stuff about, like writing fight scenes and things, and very specifically I wrote about that. It's like how the person is going to react to that, even if you're just watching it. And it applies to anything, but I did it to fight scenes because that's something that I can claim to know a lot about. But yeah, I do that all the time, and then, yeah, depending on how a person reacts to things or
that, oh my God, that'll actually be super helpful for me, because it's like there's a lot of technical shit about things that I don't understand. But if I'm writing a character that is pulling from my understanding of things, then in a way that could work, where it's like you have a character that there's very in-depth shit going on around them, but they're not necessarily able to track. So it's like, shit, God damn it, this is good. Because now I'm thinking, it's like I was actually worrying about that, because I was like, I had that moment. Okay, so when I said Mala walked towards the central chamber, the entrance to it was at least twice as tall as she was, but wasn't much wider. It was made of some metal. Okay, I followed it up with what kind. She didn't know. I wasn't in close third person, but that was me attempting to shorten it, because I realized I could expound on that and be like, it was made of some metal, and then I could go into some fact about the lore, but then I was like, but then I got to get involved. Like what's the technology that's going on right now? It's like, what kind of metal do they have? And then I'm trying to think, well, then who made the metal? Like, if she doesn't really know what that is, like, what's her expertise with the metal? But it's like, it simplifies it in close third person. If it's just like, some kind of metal, don't know what. It's like it conveys that character doesn't know what the metal is, but it doesn't, because it's like not omniscient third person. It's not like later on some information comes out and it's like the reader is like angry at the narrator earlier on, like, well, why didn't you tell me?
Right. Well,
It's
and that comes into things, like as far as details. So this is what I was kind of started to say a while ago, is I avoid a lot of details, and I have some readers that don't like that. They're like, well, why didn't you describe this technical thing? It wasn't important to the story and the character. It was wrong for the character. Like, the characters didn't need that information. You didn't need that information. So the information wasn't.
Audra,
What?
you don't understand how much this helps my NI. Like, my NI can flourish in implicity. It was all the explicit shit that was holding me back.
Well, I'm glad I can help. Yeah.
Yeah.
This is me. I don't like having things too spelled out for me. And so to me, I'm always trying to determine what's important to the story. What details are important to the plot, to the story, so that you're not hiding things. You don't want to hide things from the reader.
Well,
or not unintentionally. You don't want to be unintentionally vague. But if you're going to be vague, you want to understand why you're being vague. And if you're being specific, to me, you should always have a reason for being specific.
Oh,
It's important to the story that this thing be specific. Number two, and you want to find a way where that's important to the character, because you don't want to say it wrong for the character. So then you have to find a character or a way to point it out so that it's important to the character. Mm-hmm. And consistent with the character. And then occasionally the lesser reason, but yet is required at some point, is just for texturing. Like, I think too many people start with texturing and then go from there. And I think texturing is extremely important, but I think it takes a lot less to properly texture a world than most people think. That's my personal.
See, now I actually got a legitimate chill up my spine, because I realized this is going to help horror writing so much. Because if you have a character, like, heart's beating, and it's like, what's chasing me? And they look back, it's like, oh, fuck, green, I don't know what, got to keep moving, got to get, it's like, you can describe something very quickly. It's like, green, what does that mean? Green, like, what are they describing? Like, was it the monster? Like, what was it? Was it tree? Like, what? But it's like, in the moment, it's more like a person running from something. It's like they're only tracking so much, and if they don't have the knowledge or the expertise or the calm to process that, then it's so much more visceral. God damn, that's good.
Yeah, you get that more in the person's head. What are they? Instead of saying what they're feeling, you're conveying the state they're in by the way they're perceiving whatever it is, and and then depending on your character, they're gonna notice different things. Yeah.
Fuck. That wasn't a bad fuck. That was just like a general exclamation, like eureka. I don't say eureka. I just say fuck, just as a sentence.
The many meanings.
Yeah. It's funny because I don't know some of the technical stuff, but I mean, like, since I was, I want to say 17 or 18. I think maybe 18. No, I don't know how long ago it was, but I started listening to horror fiction podcasts, and it's like, I know that at least subconsciously I picked up some shit. I mean, I've listened to too many stories to not have picked up on anything. Mm-hmm. And that kind of, like, I kind of got it. Is like, well, once I understood what you were talking about by close third person, I was like, oh, fuck, it's that thing. But I never, yeah. Yeah, this is gonna be helpful.
Yeah, and I mean another thing that I think is important, that's a very powerful side effect of closer perspectives, is characters can be wrong. It's very
I love
awkward
that. I love
to
that.
be wrong, right?
Mhm.
Like, why would the omniscient narrator lie to you, right?
Right.
That's awkward. But a character can be wrong, and so you can have characters perceiving a situation incorrectly, and that can create tension, that can create suspense, that can shed light on the character. It can do a whole lot of different things.
Yeah.
While not being disingenuous. Right?
This appeals to me like in an SP sort of sense, because it was what I was trying to get. Like I was trying to, with all these other words, was it it's like when I was talking about Mala, it's like she let the haunting breeze linger on her skin. You know, like what I was trying to do there, but obviously I didn't understand through the mechanics. Like what I was trying to do is make some sort of a like visceral SP connection to it. It's like whatever's going on, I want to feel it.
Yeah.
And it's like that closer POV really helps that in ways that all the artistic fuckery words I could come up with don't quite nail.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, it works, and you'll hear this said like all over the places. You know, show don't tell, and it took me a while to kind of figure that out. But to me, that's what it is. It's you don't try to explain the situation to people, to the reader.
Yeah.
Never explain the situation. Just figure out what that character's doing and what that character's thinking, and then you can do a little magic here and there to tweak your plot, or make things happen the way you need it. But that's always going to be more, to me, that's always going to be more, because that is more visceral. You want that visceral character perception, and that's what I read a book for anymore. Like I eventually got tired of plots and premises and worlds and all those other things that can entertain you for a while, and it always comes down to characters for me.
Yeah. See, I thought about like, oh, well, what if I mixed in omniscient third person? But then I just thought about it. I was like, nah. It's like, to me, like personally, it's way more compelling when you have a set of characters and there is no final judgment on what was right or wrong. You just have characters, and based on the characters and based on the reaction, you have to decide what you think about it.
Yeah,
so I really liked the movie No Country for Old Men.
Yeah.
Like have you seen it?
I've seen it, yeah.
Yeah. It's just the different things go on, and just the ending with Tommy Lee Jones talking about the dream he had where his dad rode ahead of him. It's like just that ending combined with, everything that went on with the movie. It's like it's showing these characters, showing the interactions, and then that's it. You're left with the characters. Not to mention the fact that fucking Anton Chigurh was, he was something special.
Right.
Just when he's sitting down with Woody Harrelson, he's like, if the rule you followed brought you to this point, what was the point of the rule? And he's like, what the fuck? And the phone rings, lets it ring, kills him. Hello? And he's like, Moss is like, think it's Woody Harrelson. He's like, I can't remember what Chigurh says, but it's like something like, he's not available, or like something like that. And I was like, God damn. But no, I think in filmmaking, I'm not saying this is like close third person, but there's some other, it's tapping into some other realm in a way, kind of like close third person does, where it's like things aren't really getting. This is what it is. Music, I notice in films, will try to like tell rather than show, where it's like, oh, the music's building up because it's supposed to signify to you, oh, this is an important scene.
Right.
But like in No Country for Old Men, Woody Harrelson's walking up the stairs, and you just see Anton Chigurh without his shoes on, slowly rounding the bottom of the staircase and walking up behind him. No music needed. This is not good.
Right.
And it's like that kind of shit where it's just him following people in different scenes or just being in the background. It's like, oh, like that conveys so much more than any like high action, like I mean not high action, but like just high theatrics.
Yeah, well, sometimes it's the smaller, like if you're talking about like action and violent stories and stuff, like to me, it's the smaller acts of violence that sometimes are the most powerful.
Yeah, like
And
I think
yeah, go ahead.
when he well obviously when he kills the one dude for his car by the side of the road, he's like, "Can you step out of the car, sir?" He like steps out of the car. Or no, I think he asked him something. He's like, "Can you step out of the car, please?" Steps out of the car and he fucking hold still. But it's just like that scene where it's like, even though that was a great act of violence because he killed somebody, it's like that scene leading up to it where it's like it's just calm.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what sells it for me. But the scene where he needs a distraction, so it's just him walking over and stuffing the rag into the fucking into the gas cap, like, or I guess maybe gas cap's the term for the cap. I don't know what you'd call it, the gas tank. Sure, there we go. Just sort of cramming that in there, and then like lighting the end of it on fire, and then just walking into the store and just having it in the background sort of as he's walking, and then it explodes.
Right. Yeah, and it's the contrast in those. The contrast in pacing is one of the, if you look at it from a technical sense, is what it is. If everything's exciting and everything's going on, and then I was like, it doesn't. It's not that potency and that sharp movement from one kind of thing to the other, noises, and there's a lot of layers. You're comparing it to film. I find studying screenwriting and film story is actually really useful. I've read some screenwriting books, and I like screenwriting too, but there's a lot more study in those areas about structure, and I find that they don't get as caught up on the artsy fartsy stuff in screenwriting books and things.
Yeah.
They concentrate a little bit more on, and also, of course, they concentrate a lot on dialogue, which is super important.
Right.
Yeah. And I find that close third person or first person is akin to writing dialogue. I think there's a lot more that a lot of what you learn and try to do with writing dialogue can roll back into into the narration portion when you're writing those closer perspectives.
Yeah, it really lends to the implicity too, because I'm thinking about like having two characters that, based on how they think and how they interact in situations, you can sort of pick up, okay, this is like the vibe that they give off. And if you have those two characters meet and you have one of those characters act in a way that is not consistent with how they've been, then it's like, oh shit, they're not telling the truth. It's like you can sort of know that without the narrator having to be like, they weren't telling the truth.
Right. Narrator you shouldn't have to say that. And the other thing is that there's that old adage or whatever that's like, don't underestimate how smart your reader is. And that's a fine line to walk. I try to walk that line because I have things in my book that are implicit. They're pretty obvious, but at the same time, they're never stated. Like I have, we're talking about layers. I like layers in my book. So I have like the obvious plot, right? And then there's like a character. There's probably a character development plot, and then there's probably small little character development plots for all the secondary characters. But there's a big one for the protagonist. So you've got kind of the protagonist's internal plot. You've got the external objective plot that's kind of drawing them in, that they're going to get involved with, right? That's kind of the reason for all this. And then I like to have like a nice little psychological plot in there too. That's some sort of like conflict between characters that sets up. And so I did some stuff with that, and there's some stuff that's very important to understand that particular layer of plot, but I never stated it clearly. And I've had people miss it that have read the book. But then I've had a lot of people that get it, and the people that get it are like freaking out. They're like, "Where's the next book?" They're like, "What's going to happen with this?" Right?
Uh-huh.
And the people that don't get it never even knew it was there, which is kind of funny. But I find that it's, you know, but I think it's important to be aware of it. Like, I don't know, that's what it is to me. It's all very intentional as far as manipulating your reader.
Uh-huh.
And understanding what you're trying to do, rather than just writing down, what happened.
Right. Yeah. So kind of feel like with these paragraphs, like there's an opportunity here for me to sort of, in a way, like I drew a parallel in my mind with like having a character for a video game, where it's like you're sort of defining certain like stats or like attributes in a way, and it's like you sort of get your party, whether or not they're together, you sort of get your characters or whatnot, and then it's like the plots are almost like, well, I mean, I don't want to draw too much of a corollary because it doesn't completely track, but I was just thinking in my head it was like kind of like quests or like like campaigns or something like that. It's like there's this plot development where it's like you have these characters sort of. Do you want, I mean, like if it's a plot or like character development, then they're like testing their mettle in some way, or like there's some sort of a change. I don't know. Maybe there's another analogy I could utilize, but there is a catalytic effect to it where it's like there's like a chemistry aspect where it's like, okay, these people all correlate to certain values, and they're sort of going through the computation, and they're going to come out as either something else or they're going to remain the same depending on how how it gets computed. But then also I think where the magic happens is not necessarily in the chemistry, but like in the, I'm going to use the word alchemy of it, which is like, so like it's another factor I have in my head, but I'm trying to figure out what exactly it is. Maybe it's more in the implicity sort of thing, or maybe not. I don't know. I'm relating that more to maybe an NI aspect. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
I'm just playing around with ideas in my head.
You're talking about the characters and them having change. I mean, the character that changes is the most common sort of arc for a character. I personally think it's very interesting to play with characters that don't change,
right.
Because that's not typical.
I just had that thought, and it made me
between the characters. Yeah, what do being around other characters? How do they affect and change characters around them? And yeah, I like things to be caused by characters, I suppose would be a way to put it. So like I like changes in characters. It's like, all right, this character has potentials, but in the end, it's probably it's because their plot now, their track now is encountering this other character, and because of that interaction, they're kind of going to end up developing into this. And I even like it. Like I have a character that intentionally kind of manipulates characters, which I think is fun.
Mm-hmm.
And you see, not only are they changing, but you've also got this weird thing. You're like, oh, but this guy is kind of like trying to make you like, wow. And things. But yeah, I think that alchemy, like I get that. It's like the different characters and the different ways they are. And it's important to understand how those different characters kind of affect and kind of what reactions there are putting certain types of characters together. And
I feel like what you're talking about here, it's crazy how there's like corollaries between writing and like real life.
Yeah.
Because I'm just thinking to myself, I was like, I think a big problem in my life and perhaps for other people too, is that they're viewing things through an omniscient third-person perspective, where it's like they think that the story that they have is the right one, because why would life lie to them? But then if you take it into a closer form, you have all these characters interacting with one another, and it's like, well, who's right? Who's wrong? What's the real scoop? And it's like, well, you have to try to figure that out.
Right. And you realize that every character has their own arc.
Right.
And you shift the protagonist's perspective from any character. And there isn't a right one. Yeah. That's something actually, like, just thinking about that, like, that's something I do when I write, is I try to at least do a little bit of analysis and thought, kind of, I want to say thoughting, that's not the right word. Contemplation, whatever, having thoughts, thinking, doing about characters. And I try to sit in even secondaries, and I try to at least sit there and go, okay, from this character's perspective, what's their story? What's the book that they're the protagonist in, and all the way across. And I think that really adds a lot of depth to your characters. But and then I always try to do 2 or 3 different levels of motivation on a character's behalf. So I usually try to have an external, like, objective. I go, okay, what's the objective motivation for them to be acting or moving, or because you've usually got a direction you want them to move in, right? And so you got to figure, okay, what physically or objectively is going to motivate them to do this? What internally and kind of emotionally are they conscious of? Like, what conscious thought or kind of feeling is motivated at this time? And then I usually try to throw in an unconscious motivation too, that usually they're not aware of, but can be taken advantage of. And if you kind of do those layers, then you can kind of see how they change. And then you authentically, like, move them through the story. And I go, okay, what do I have to do to make this character? Because a lot of, especially with, like, to me, like a thriller or something where you've got these really kind of tough, badass characters, like they have to be smart. They have to be cynical. Like, they're not gullible on a lot of levels, especially when you have less gullible characters, right? You have less weaknesses. You're like, all right, so what is their weakness? And the easiest way to move them is to manipulate some sort of unconscious motivation or whatever, and kind of figure those out.
Right.
And so that makes it, to me anyway, that's one of the ways I try to make things move.
I just realized, as a writer, in some ways, not every way, but in some ways, I will be limited by my actual life experiences, which means if I want to be able to write better action sequences, I probably have to mess around with things like weapons to get a feel for how they work.
A certain level of personal experience is important, but also you can learn to research a lot of it too. Mm-hmm. Or talk to people. Like that's one thing. So, like, I have a scene in my book that was one of my favorite. I just remember doing it when I was writing. So I have a guy in a plane. And so I went and I spent 2 days with my granddad, who's a pilot, and we plotted out. So I had this theory. I'm like, all right, I got to make this, and he's got to run out of fuel, and he's got to go from this place to this place, and this place where he's going to has to be relatively close to this place. And I had a few constraints, right, on, like, a flight plan and all this other stuff. And so I started working out with, like, different planes, and, like, okay, if this plane, and finally I figured out, like, if this plane with the standard, like, aftermarket fuel tanks, all right, that will get him this far. And then I started plotting out routes, and then I started asking people, because I wanted him to have a failure, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, what kind of failure is he going to have in this plane? So I start talking to my granddad and my dad, and then they've heard stories from other people and pilots, and coming up with, okay, what are some really simple, problems that could happen, or dumb mistakes that you could make that would cause you to, have to land the plane, and different things. I don't remember everything they said, but I remember I finally came up with, like, this thing, and I spent like 2 or 3 days basically talking to people and discussing possibilities. And then I felt like I wrote the scene pretty authentically when I did it,
Right.
But the weird thing, the sad part is that you'll go spend like a week researching something and talking to people and doing all sorts of things, and then it'll be like 1 page in your book, right?
Yeah.
After all that, but yeah, and the more physical, like, interact, like, fighting things, like, I think that is one area that it's probably does help to have a little bit of experience in. Because I see stuff that gets wrong all the time, like people making mistakes with guns, and I've written some articles. Like I remember my blogger was like, if you're writing a cozy knitting mystery, nobody probably cares if you mess that up. But if you're writing like a hard hitting thriller with everybody shooting all that, like you should try to get your your guns straight and things like that.
Right. Yeah, I think for story writing, I'll probably be able to start more with, as I mentioned, some of the horror stuff, but having characters who don't necessarily have the full scoop on what's going on, don't necessarily have a extensive set of skills, and have a considerable amount of fear about things. As sad as that may sound, will probably make for some very entertaining stories.
I was going to say that makes for good stories. That's probably an easier way to write stories than some of the ones I do.
Especially if I make...
Like, why do my characters have to be scared? Why do they have to be all these other things?
Uh-huh.
Then it takes a lot of work to make that work, because it a lot of times breaks the traditional kind of easy plot forms and things. And you're like, okay.
Right.
And I've had people tell me, they're like, your character needs to be more scared. I'm like, but in that moment they weren't. They decided not to be. Like, that's the point.
Right.
But, yeah, they'll be like, I don't understand why your character's doing these things. Like, okay. If anything, I have a tendency to get a little bit too close to the this is just what's happening, and explain not enough. But I don't know. Some people like it, some people don't.
I think one thing I'll have to get used to is these shorter sentences, like out of breath, chest pounding, just like boom, boom, boom. I mean, like that's how thoughts flow a bit more, but I
Right. You want
yeah.
really short sentences, sparingly, because that's your secret weapon, right? To really kick up the intensity.
Right.
But in general, shorter sentences, are better. And it's one of those things, you can break a lot of the proper writing rules. Because there's a lot of sentences, especially when I'm editing, I'll find that I'll cut sentences where I had commas, and I'll be like, yeah, this is a proper sentence, but I feel like a little more separation is what I want here. Will help me flow. So help it flow. So I'll cut sentences up into fragments sometimes and different things just to. And then white space is also super useful.
What's that?
White space.
What is white space?
So new paragraphs and moving things, how you move things along on the page.
Right.
And
one thing I saw employed was books where you get like asterisks or diamonds indicating a separation of time and character.
Yeah. I have mixed feelings about that. Personally, I usually try to maintain one character perspective in a chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And a relatively consistent time situation. Like, I like to break it up with chapters as far as people and time to a certain degree. Some people do it differently, and they'll have longer chapters where it's like almost a story is each chapter, a kind of a short, there's some sort of narrative resolution in each chapter.
Right.
I really like the power. Another little tool or thing that I do that I like to use a lot is the last line of a chapter and all the white space after it. And that's another reason I like to have lots of chapters. I really like the power of that last line in a chapter. The first line in a chapter and the last line in a chapter is super powerful, and I like using those to leave thoughts hanging, because that in a start of the chapter, you're setting, if you can set a mood and a feeling, you can set up all kinds of some sort of vibe with your first sentence at the start of the chapter, and you can leave sort of a